Welcome to the CTA podcast. Join us as we critically examine the ideological capture of the psychotherapy field. Here we discuss better, common humanity proposals for a fairer society. Our discussions are thought-provoking, and our guests are from diverse backgrounds, bringing unique perspectives to the table. This is the CTA podcast with your hosts, Jaco van Zyl and Pristine Self. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the CTA podcast, Critical Therapy Antidote podcast, with myself, Jaco van Zyl, and Pristine Self. We have a very interesting guest who joins us today. This is Professor Emeritus Herbert Schwartz. He was Professor of Organizational Behavior at the School of Business Administration at Oakland University. He is the author of several books and many academic papers. Books include Narcissistic Process and Corporate Decay. Quite interesting. That was quite an early book. And in 2001, The Revolt of the Primitive: Inquiry into the Roots of Political Correctness. And it is specifically around political correctness that we're going to have our discussion today. And in 2010, Society Against Itself: Political Correctness and Organizational Self-Destruction. Howard, very, very welcome to our CTA podcast.
Thank you.
I have a question, and when I looked at your CV, I saw a steep developmental curve in terms of how you started at one end and ended up developing a social theory of contemporary political correctness today from a psychoanalytic perspective. How did you come to these insights?
I'll just pick an arbitrary point.
Right.
I noticed when I was in the first place, I came to the study of organizational behavior by a very strange route. I was actually a student of Herbert Marcuse, and I was a leftist a fellow, and I got a job teaching in a business school, and you could imagine that those two things did not go very well together. And I had to work out a way to make them go together, and I did by developing a kind of psychology of alienation, talking about myself, and that worked out pretty well. I found that I was able to explain things that other people didn't know were there. I like that. But then after a while, I ran into something that didn't really make a lot of sense to me. I couldn't understand it, and that was political correctness. I was giving a talk to some faculty members at the time after I got away from a sabbatical, and I was psychoanalytic, and one woman in the group just laid into me something fierce about Freud and he was a sexist, that kind of stuff. I thought it was very, very strange because that was not the way that faculty members talked to other faculty members.
Yeah.
What the hell was going on? I looked around the room to see how other people were responding to this. And what I found out was that they didn't think that she was strange and doing something kind of out of line. They thought that of me.
Wow.
And I was fascinated. And of course, you ran into those things. I don't have to give you, too many examples, but it was very clear at that time that this was a social movement.
Yes.
And that no, in the first place, so nobody recognized it as a social movement. But even to the extent that those that did, they had no clue what it was about.
Right. It is interesting to hear that it was almost an organic development of things.
Oh, sure. Yeah, well, yeah. Let's see. I decided I had to work on this. I had to understand it. Because it was clear enough to me at the time that this is very dangerous stuff. So I decided that I would look at political correctness from the standpoint of the theory that I had developed to understand organizations.
Yes.
Called the narcissistic process in organizations, and I was very surprised to find that it worked pretty well. And in the case of narcissistic process in organizations, what you have is an idealization of an organization or its high employees that edged out reality, so they could deal with it. They were very adept at playing out the fantasy, but the fantasy had increasingly little to do with the world.
Fascinating.
So I took a look at that from the standpoint that these political kinds of concerns, it worked pretty well, except that in this case you had certain groups that were that idealized,
right,
and it didn't really matter what they did because the emphasis here was on the process of idealization. It didn't necessarily have anything to do with anything, and when it did have something to do, that the whatever it had to do with was brought into this form of explanation.
Yes.
And again, it was a narcissistic process. Somebody was playing to somebody else's sense of their own. I call it being the center of a loving world.
Yes, uniqueness, their grandiosity, their specialness. That is essentially narcissistic. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And I started playing with that, looking for examples that I could find that represented this, and through doing this, developing a theory that was adequate to the case, and that was my first book on political correctness.
Yes.
I called it Revolt of the Primitive, because as I went through with this, I recognized that the central dynamics that were taking place here were very primitive dynamics, and especially on the female side.
Okay.
That we had here a primordial mother whose narcissism was being played to.
Right.
Except that this wasn't exactly the same thing as when you play as playing to a man's narcissism in an organization.
Maybe you can elaborate a bit more on the distinction between female style narcissism versus male or masculine style narcissism, Howard.
Well, I'll be doing that. But in brief, the point is that narcissism is an expression of fusion with mother.
Right.
Mother is the world,
Right.
and she loves us. And what do you need? Now this works out differently for men than it does for women, because women, in a certain sense, have the fusion with the mother pretty well taken care of. I mean, they are the mother. They don't have to do anything, right? Just be themselves. Men, on the other hand, have to earn their way into a connection, into their connection with their mother.
Right.
And men earning their way into the connection with their mother is their work. And ultimately, you're right, at large enough, that's civilization itself. People don't, guys don't do that, just because they like to do it. This is a myth that the mother created, but they do it because if all of this is about is fusion with the mother, is unity with the mother, then it must be the highest desideratum for anybody.
Okay.
Men and women.
Right.
Now, women can handle it because, it's not an all or nothing thing. They can handle it better because they can imagine themselves. They can fantasize themselves in that position of being a mother. Men can't. So in order to be able to get back to that fusion, they have to do something. Well, what do? They've got to do something that she's going to like. And that's going to give her a reason for letting him hang around. And that's, so that's his work. Now, that was theoretically, that was very rich stuff.
Yes.
And I found it very fertile in opening up case studies of organizational decay. In the first book, I looked at things that the U.S. Navy, which had really blown up its officer corps through political correctness. It's just gotten worse and worse. But it really did a number on itself. And you could see this in operation at universities, and it helped to make sense out of matters that were otherwise incomprehensible, and be contrary to the very idea of what the function that was being damaged in this way.
Right. So idealization is a fantasy, a grandiose fantasy where the ideal of the self is set as the aim, right? And in these dynamics, the self is idealized in fantasy and then imposed upon reality, as opposed to allowing reality to inform a more reasonable concept of the self.
Yes, yes. The question is whether there is reality testing going on.
Precisely.
But it's not the self that's idealized here. It's the person. I mean, some people are just they're worshipped.
Okay.
And this worship is love.
Okay.
I mean, political correctness is about love. And that gives it its appeal. And so we find it's a kind of characteristic of political correctness that for the person or the thing or the movement, whatever it is, that is worshipped, that is idealized in this way, often they can do just about anything.
Right.
And the person who is idealizing them will not see anything wrong with it. I mean, I watch politics these days with a sense of very, very deep fascination.
Okay.
About the way that, for example, Biden is treated, as opposed to Trump, who after all has his limitations. Can't deny that. It's a poor, but Biden seems to have gotten away with the theft of tens of millions of dollars. People will go to absolute extremes to maintain that idealization. There can't be a rational way of explaining that.
Right.
Don't you think, the idealization is happening on both extreme ends here, at least in the States, if we're talking about the political spectrum. The idealization is extreme on the right with Trump, as well as it is possibly on the left with Biden. The idealization and there's the lack of humanness.
Sure,
I think.
but it's in this case, it's a question of what you've got to do in order to be called out.
Yes.
There's no doubt about Trump's limitations or
sure
whatever. I when he was the president, they used to go back and forth from one day to another. Thinking about him as a great figure, and thinking he was a boor. And an impulsive thug. I grew up, as a matter of fact. We grew up within a few miles of each other in Queens, and he is not that unfamiliar to me. He's a guy from the neighborhood.
Yes.
But it's a matter of it's a matter of where things stand in the balance.
Yeah. So in terms of this idealization, Howard, what is achieved is that certain individuals, but certain groups specifically, are elevated to a state of moral impunity and of immunity of scrutiny. They couldn't be scrutinized. They couldn't be criticized. They are completely presented as completely pristine and uncorrupted and incorruptible.
Yes.
Okay.
As time goes by, the category to which that applies gets wider and broader and further and further removed from reality.
Yes.
We find not only are we expected to believe that men and women who have had certain kinds of operations, take various drugs, become the other type, But if you say that they are still the type they started out with, you can lose your job.
Yes. It's and I think it's, I just want to say, because you made a comment, your book here, which was wonderful to read, called Political Correctness and the Destruction of Social Order. So you made a comment in there, and it had reminded me of something that I had said to some colleagues of mine when this was in 2016, after the election. Trump was elected and everybody was freaking out. And I said, listen, the political correctness, the problem with all this political correctness and all of this lack of being forthcoming is taking what's already there, sweeping it under the rug, intensifying it, and potentially causing it more harm in the end than good, because we don't know what we're playing with. We don't know what we're dealing with. I wanted to just bring that up because I definitely saw in your book that correlation between political correctness and what that ends up doing to a society over time. It sprung up all these memories I had of having these same conversations, where, you know, as I mentioned, where I said I would prefer people to be out there. I want to know what they think. That helps me make a more informed decision.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. When you don't have anybody out there who's saying what they think, it tends to make what they think, well, not only unsayable, but corrupted in its own right. As you said, you know. And there are certain things that you really better not corrupt because of the danger that's involved in it.
Yes.
You know? I mean, what they're doing with the American military is just, it's bad. Scares the hell out of me.
Yes. Everybody should be afraid with what they're doing with the military in this country. And I'm not seeing that. Go ahead, Jaco.
But that fits in with a model,
yes,
Pristine,
it does.
And Howard, you can elaborate a bit more on it, where we have the symbiotic relationship between the mother and the infant.
Yes.
And the mother represents a societal system where compassion is everything, and where there is a symbiotic relationship with some of these victim groups, these who have been morally immunized against scrutiny and criticism. And this symbiosis is maintained at the expense of the paternal function. And the paternal function, like you pointed out in your articles in your group, or in your book, represents reality, scrutiny, interpretation, criticism, challenge, objective truth, measurement, those types of things, merit. Maybe you can elaborate a bit more on that and see, and maybe explain how this scheme is applied, for instance, in the American military.
It does appear that serious decisions have been made. These are decisions that should have been known to be counter to the function of the military. For example, I guess it was the Marines. They were under pressure to integrate women into the the ground fighting, and they did a very elaborate series of tests. It didn't work too well, but they did it anyway. How did they do it? They did it because they said, well, all these tests were done by people who came in with the idea that women couldn't handle these tests, and so the results were all the results were thrown away, you know. And you don't know how widespread that is, but we do know that they're having a terrible difficulty, recruiting.
Yes.
Something like 25%.
Yes.
This is not a total of Hun's army. It's a very, very highly specialized organization, and everybody in it has to be able to do the job.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's reality. Military will tell you, will teach you, and combat will teach you, ideology means nothing. Reality means everything. And it's
well, and the reality is that women are limited, in certain ways that men are not physically. That is what the facts and the reality. We've drifted so far away from fact and reality, biological function, that we're in this place where everything's androgynous in some disgusting way, apparently.
Fantastical.
And fantastical. But the reality and the facts show that women do not have the body strength that men have biologically, and that therefore, if you want the strongest military possible to defend and protect your freedoms, you want to go with the people who can do it, not because you're trying to be politically correct and let's make everybody happy and play patty cake with everybody and give everybody a first place trophy and medal, right? Because that's what we do now.
Because we're compassionate.
It's destructive.
Right.
And dangerous. I mean, this is dangerous.
Extremely dangerous.
I would love to tie that into what you wrote about with the anti-bullying movement and what that has done and what it has not done. Because all we hear nowadays, right, are about bullying. I was bullied. Every comment that is taken or interpreted to be, you know, unpleasant or unloving, unadoring, lacking adoration tends to be something that people are interpreting to be a bullying comment.
Yes.
Or
Yeah.
bullying statement. So
Yes.
if maybe you can talk a little more about that, because I really related to that component of the book as well, where, you know, they talk about, you know, people have become snowflakes, right? That's kind of the slang term, but using that real phenomenon that we're seeing now with anti-bullying tactics and with people throwing that word around.
These days, just about everything is redefined in these I don't know, left-wing social justice terms. When they make an anti-bullying movement,
Yes.
it's really not about bullying at all. It's going to be it's going to carry with it baggage from the left.
Yes.
They teach socio-emotional learning.
Yes.
That's great, except that when you look at what they mean by social emotional learning, it's the same, it's the same crap. It's just impossible to even to keep track of this stuff. All this stuff that they're doing these days about how the Republicans want to burn books. Do the Republicans want to burn books? Well, no, but they would like to get homosexual pornography out of the children's libraries.
That's exactly what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
And that's been manipulated into some, it's a framing of it, right?
The framing is obvious. And again, it is this thing about there are these vulnerable little victims and there is this evil other, and the maternal function needs to intervene to protect these vulnerable victims. To
destroy the parental function, not just to get it out or to mute it or dull it. They want to destroy the parental function altogether and eradicate it.
Absolutely disrupt.
That's right.
Absolutely.
Exclamation point, period. That's full stop.
And once it's disrupted, you have all these disorientated people, children especially, that are vulnerable to the seduction of the candy merchant. Where the doctor is deemed to be evil, withholding, dishing out bitter medicine, how evil of him, and they want to dish out the candies from the candy merchant.
Mm-hmm.
And that is why we're sitting with this nonsense of hypersexualized and confused children, because everybody is just so compassionate.
Yes. Which leads to a lack of developing resilience, the resilience that you need moving into adulthood to deal with adversity, to deal with rejection, to deal with getting told no, to deal with abandonment, all the things you are not likely to face, you are guaranteed to face as an adult in some way at some point in your life, whether it's in your personal, professional, etc. There are no skill sets that are being developed in order to learn how to deal with adversity as you move into a mature adult phase of life, right? Because the overly compassionate and everybody gets first place has dismantled that completely. And there, right there, the paternal function is gone. The maternal function has taken over and smothered the whole of society. It's choking it. It's choking it, strangling it. Let's just say.
Strangling it. Yeah.
Ooh, that just set me up for a moment. But yes.
Yeah.
And so it was interesting because you had pointed out that bullying is in fact sort of a normal occurrence, that almost everybody has been bullied or gets bullied or has faced a bully, and that statistically bullying numbers are down while the anti-bullying movement moves up. right? And how those two things are completely incompatible. Yes, right.
And it's exactly the same relation that you see with racism.
Yes.
There aren't any racists around, there used to be, but the less racism you have, the more widespread it is claimed to be, until everything becomes racist. And
when you change the scale to microscopic measurements, then you will start pick up more and more and more of it. It just doesn't mean, just because you change the scale to more microscopic measurement doesn't mean it is more prevalent. It just means that your scale has changed, your measurement has changed. And even these days with microaggressions and with internalized racism and internalized homophobia, I mean, they can decide to their heart's delight to what microscopic or nanoscopic measure they want to determine the existence of all these vile attitudes. And the smaller you go, the more you might find of it, but you'd be missing the woods for the trees. In general, our societies are way more tolerant than they've ever been.
Yes.
But that is not enough, because within this symbiotic relationship between mom and infant, nothing is ever enough, is it?
Yes.
The greed just keeps on growing.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Which gives rise to and normalizes what you call the pristine self.
Yeah.
Which I loved, by the way, in which, and primary narcissism, I believe you also tied it into that, to where the only actions that one wants to receive or receives is of love and adoration that exalt
and affirmation
and affirmation and absolutely
and obedience.
Yes. So when that's challenged, right, that becomes a problem. It undermines.
Yes.
And this undermines social structure in general.
It does. Right. It does, because it makes the ordinary reciprocation that's involved.
Yes.
In social structure impossible.
Yes.
You want something on one side, but you can't even explain the other side. And it just goes off the board. I mean, like this thing about well, here's a good example. Transphobia.
Yeah.
When the hell did that become a phobia?
That's a good question.
Or, well, anything like that. You first have to set up your category, and that category, I don't think, is necessarily built out of real violation. I think it's a political project. There was a book a while back, it's on my shelf there someplace, in which they talked about the development of the attitude toward homophobia in the psychiatric profession. It wasn't based on any kind of scientific discovery. It was a group that gained power and used that power, in a very inventive ways to become one of the protected groups.
Right. Even Otto Kernberg admits as much in his book on, I can't remember the specific title of the book now, where he distinguishes, and he goes into the psychoanalysis of homosexuality, and he distinguishes between early onset homosexuality and late onset homosexuality. But right in the beginning, the introduction of that chapter on homosexuality, he says this has become such a minefield. I'm paraphrasing now. It has become politically so difficult to research and to analyze and to theorize around sexuality and sexual identity, because of these activist groups and because of the intolerance to scrutiny and to the intolerance of examination, that psychoanalysts and theorists are hesitant to do these kinds of research now.
Yeah.
So homosexuality is a taboo topic. It's a no-go zone.
Yes.
Don't touch it. The same with identity and gender identity. There are very brave people currently. They're not supposed to be brave. In a free society, this should be invited.
Exactly.
There are very brave people, and they are brave precisely because of this viciousness of the destructive maternal function. She does not like to be challenged, and she does not like her symbiotic bond with these pristine groups to be disrupted as much as they don't want it to be disrupted. And because of that, and because of the danger, these kinds of studies are not being performed.
Ultimately, nobody will really know where we started off.
Yeah.
And the meeting itself will, it'll be like, fiat currency. It's what, whatever we define it to be, it's going to be. The words don't have meanings.
Yes.
When we were talking about the father's job really is to create a language that other people can understand.
Yes.
Yes.
And that's what's going. That's what we're in danger of losing. And if we lose that, it's so the whole thing is becoming so Orwellian.
Yeah. Slipping into social psychosis, because if language starts disintegrating into private language, where a person's where a person might be using the same language as you do but meaning totally different things, then we're in trouble. And well, that is an old psychoanalytic tenet, and even Lacan picked it up, as you most certainly know well. And that has been one of the targets of these woke activists, and that is to disrupt language.
Yes.
In one of your chapters, you go into the realm of meaning, and it is very interesting to note that these ideologues are not that worried about violence. They engage in violence freely. Their qualm is with ideas. That is an interesting concept, because the battlefield is within the imaginary. The battlefield is not within the symbolic. It's not really related to reality because they've disavowed the symbolic. The battlefield is within the imaginary. And that is why they find competing concepts so threatening, not so.
Yeah, because of course, once the story becomes, who was telling the story about themselves, you have to pay attention to it and buy into the truth of those stories. It's not really an issue.
You said you studied under Herbert Marcuse.
Yes.
I couldn't help but notice that what you described in your books is more or less what he prescribed in his Eros and Civilization, where he encouraged the unmediated access to indulgent pleasure.
Yeah.
Unmediated, in other words, we chuck out the father so that we have unmediated access to maternal bliss.
Yes.
He prescribed it in 1968, and here, a few decades later, one of his students arrives on a formulation on society describing what Herbert Marcuse predicted.
Yeah.
Does that fit?
I think it's fair. Yeah. I don't know that Marcuse predicted it, but he certainly recommended it. I mean, that was Marcuse's utopian element.
Yeah, unrepressed society. Yep.
I just have to say, and maybe this connects or doesn't, but what I also found very fascinating, Howard, is what you said about diversity in your book. I have heard that described in a similar vein one time, and that one time was from one of the chapter writers for Critical Therapy Antidotes book. That's the only other time I've ever heard something similar. And I want to just quote something you quoted Putnam, and you said, the more ethnically diverse the people we live around, the less we trust them. This pattern may be distressing normativity, but it seems to be consistent with conflict theory. Say more about that. No, let me add this piece too, because this is what really got me here. Diversity seems to trigger not an in-group, out-group division. Again, you're quoting Putnam, but an omni or social isolation. So people don't tend to go in-group, out-group. They tend to withdraw collectively or withdraw from the collective and go internal, and does not necessarily make them more active either in politics or local government. They tend to pull away. It decreases the frequency of voting, and we were talking a bit about our politics here earlier. Increased interest and knowledge about politics and more participation and marches and social reform groups, which tend to be what we're seeing now with critical social justice. It fuels movements such as critical social justice in this way. You're able to identify a villain, and then you have all of these fringe groups that come together on that level to identify the same villain, which becomes it's the same person, essentially. Diminished expectation that others will cooperate. So you have that fire that's fueling that. Not only are we going to be revolutionary, and we have to be, people are not going to comply. They're not going to listen to us unless we're doing something incredibly extreme. So we can sort of make a parallel there to the summer of 2020 riots that happened all across this nation. They were riots. If people want to call them anything else, that is not accurate. Where cities burned to the ground. Lower number of close friends and confidants, more time spent watching television. And I laugh at that because I am an avid TV watcher and I live in a diverse community. And more agreement that television is my most important form of entertainment, which we know television is both A, escapist TV, and B, a passive activity.
Right.
Right.
So tell us more about all of that, because I absolutely found it brilliant. And again, I've only heard this argument from one other person who said that, diversity can actually disrupt the social order of certain communities when they bring their own values and different standards of ethics, worldviews into a place that's already has some pretty well established ones, and the anarchy that's created as a result. So, and this is a hot button. I mean, I'm sure I could be censored all over the place for saying this, but I really loved your arguments about it. So maybe if you could expand a bit on that, Howard, and what
the history of the idea of diversity is very instructive.
Mm-hmm.
This is an idea that had a beginning. Their argument for ethnic diversity was that it would increase ways of looking at things. It'll increase, the flow of the marketplace, ideas, and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And then you take a look, at the way the diversity movement grows, and that's not what happens at all. That's where you get political correctness.
Mm-hmm.
It totally stifles different, because you could say one thing and mean something have it interpreted in exactly the opposite way.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody,
Yes.
nobody knows that. Nobody sees it taking place.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, it's the whole diversity thing is really so fascinating in so many ways. One of the aspects of this is the way they keep adding categories.
Yes.
Diversity wasn't enough; it had to be inclusion. It had to be whatever, you know, the E thing. And you know, you see this see this in various places, like, you know, LGBT and so on, because none of them works. They're supposed to have some kind of magical power, but they don't have a magical power. They're just words, and they become they become less than words.
Yes.
So the fight becomes, you know, who gets to be the diverse one, and that's you know, that's not about. There's no thought that goes into that question. It's just around. It's just, you know, it's just about power. You know,
Power.
It's about power and a race to the bottom. Who's the weakest? Who's the most vulnerable? Because they would be the most protected, the most
Yes.
immunized. It is a race
Well,
to the bottom.
Well, yeah, they are protected. Yeah, and it's a question of who gets to be protected. But the question of it becomes a matter of power. Who gets them to claim that they are the most powerless?
Right.
Yes.
It's nice to have been able to do that. It was quite a trick, you know.
Yes. And they riled up all these rescuers,
Yes.
all these pampering mammies, and those with the same attitude and viewpoint and same fantasies about this pristine world where everybody just lives together and there is no aggression, there's no viciousness, and there's no intolerance, and there's just this dyadic bliss because the evil old father has been chucked out.
Yes.
And we don't have to deal with reality anymore, thank God.
Yeah.
How do we get out of this big mess that we're in? We're going to solve it today in the next 10 minutes.
Tell the truth. No, really. I mean, there's really that's the only thing that will. I don't know whether it'll work or not, but it's the direction. It's that somehow or other we have to go in.
What is that?
Truth.
Tell the truth.
Tell the truth.
Tell the truth.
Tell the truth.
Yep. Yeah. You know, it's Orwell. You know, the hardest thing is to see what's in front of your face. But you know, I must say that in the last few years, I think we've made some progress.
I think so too.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know whether we'll be able to get out of it in time, but you know, things are possible now.
Mm-hmm.
That weren't possible a while back.
And I think one of the things that makes it possible is that more and more people are seeing through the facade. They are seeing through this attempt at being duped. And that is a very, very scary but valuable moment of disillusionment. When you're engaging with a system that projects guilt into you all the time, and because you're decent and because you're coming from a Judeo-Christian Western background, you identify with the projection all the time.
Yes.
And you feel guilty, and you bend over backwards, and you accommodate, and you tolerate. And gradually you're seeing, but these people are shifting goalposts all the time.
Yes.
And they are ignoring the harm being done. And just look at what they're writing. They're planning to target children. They're theorizing and imagining having children, you know, giving children access to unfettered sexual content and information. This, that, and the other thing. The plan to obliterate the family as we know it.
Yes.
you know, the nuclear family, you start noticing, but there is a huge agenda driving this guilt tripping they're engaging in. And once you get disillusioned, and once you realize that you've been duped, it is over. They will never get you to feel guilty again. And this disillusionment is starting to happen. What I'm just fascinated about is realizing that you have noticed this a decade and a half before Helen Pluckrose and James Lindsay, the brilliant minds, Peter Boghossian, started writing on wokeness, critical social justice, which is fascinating. And that is you know, this is credit due to you.
Yes.
And it is fantastic to see that even as early as 2001, you started noticing and formulating it.
Sounding the alarm. Yes.
And sounding the alarm.
Sounding the alarm on all of it.
Just as they have since 2016. And I think it is fascinating, Howard.
It's odd. Yeah, well, yeah.
And even some psychologists and psychoanalysts too, who have started to notice this, because you're formulating it in Oedipal terms, and you're saying that the politically correct society these days is anti-Oedipal. They're waging war against reality. I would say, in addition to telling the truth, the way out will be a merciless confrontation with hard, objective reality anyway.
And no, non-compliance. I mean, that's another big piece of this too, is not compliance
too, but that's more at a social level.
Sure.
But they are going to run into irreversible damage of children, for instance.
Oh, yes.
There are going to be thousands and thousands of young adults, older adults with osteoporosis, anorgasmic, sterile, sick to the core.
Yes.
Been duped into this ideology that's part of critical social justice. And that will be the harsh reality that they'll have to deal with.
Yes.
And that time is coming. Tick tock, tick tock. Reality will catch up with the anti-Oedipal, the anti-paternal, symbiotic, perverting mother and her infants.
Well, I'd like to think. Well, I think so, but there are dangers involved. I mean, that would also be the moment at which violence becomes a social organizing principle.
Yes.
Yes.
That's what we're seeing now.
Yes. Yeah.
It's become a central organizing principle, and that's even written into law in the state of California. And you know, Jaco, you know this. I've mentioned it many times. The law here now is you are allowed to theft from stores up to a certain amount of money before you have to be prosecuted. Otherwise, there's no prosecution required. And, you know, talk about unlimited indulgences, right? And if you're the shop owner and you approach one of these people about what they're stealing, you are going to be fined $18,000. And anybody who does not know that can look that up in the California code, the assembly that just passed both of those, or that just passed that particular bill. The other one where you can steal up to $1,000 without being prosecuted has been around, I think, for the past year. So now what I want to ask the both of you, actually, I have a question, is this is going to sound very anti-woman, anti-feminist, you know, women are equal, the conversation we've had today. What would your response be to those people who are going to say that?
Well, just say the truth. Anybody who really can see that there's a difference between men and women, I don't think is really going to be subject to argument against that position.
Mm-hmm.
But look, you know, the thing is, thing is what it is. There are places where the guard slips,
Mm-hmm.
and where the reality that we brought along with this sexual differentiation, has to be seen. I mean, surveys of job satisfaction
Mm-hmm.
do not show any great increase in the happiness of women at work.
Mm-hmm. That is true.
Mm.
That is 100% true.
Yeah.
I think what I can say in this regard is the Oedipal drama is a metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, the symbiotic relationship between the maternal and the infant can be participated with by men too. Men have also, there are men who have also pushed for this unbridled compassion. And those who represent the paternal functions are men and women. There are more than enough women who are sufficiently reality affected, or who have sufficient reality contact, who are not so easily seduced into the pleasure principle and unbridled participation in excessive pleasure.
Yes.
So that is a metaphorical drama to begin with. And I would say my second answer is, and sorry to those who are narcissistically constituted, but given the extremes, women can also be evil as men can be evil. Newsflash.
Yes.
In other words, when we give unbridled power to women and they allow the feminine instincts to take over, they can be just as destructive and evil and vicious as men can be under the same conditions. It is just different flavors.
100%.
Right. So it is what it is. That's reality. And we need to deal with it.
Yeah.
But nothing to do with being anti-women or anti-men or pro-women or pro-men. It's got everything to do with taking sufficient account of the evidence to our disposal.
Excellent.
And this isn't new evidence. This is millennia old.
Yes. Excellent. Fantastic.
And we really want to thank you for your wisdom and thank you for your writing. And look, while you're alive, please keep writing.
Yes.
Absolutely.
That's it.
As long as my fingers work.
As long as your fingers work.
Yes. All right. Well, you don't even need your fingers anymore. All you need is a good recorder, right?
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah. All right. Thank you again so much.
Thank you.